I'm called Anna, indeed, as you said, and I'm going to talk about mudlarking on a particularly low tide on a particular day on the Thames in central London. So mudlarking, as I'm sure most of you know, is when you go along and you scavenge the foreshore and you look for objects that have been lost or dropped over time in the mud. And because London's so old, you have like 2,000 years of history lying there. So you might find a Roman coin, or you might find a sex toy chucked over the Millennium Bridge by a hen party. You just never know. The whole range in between. It's very exciting. And if you're a mudlark, you rely on the tides because the tidal reach of the Thames is huge. It's 7 meters. It goes up and down twice a day. And it wears away very gently at the mud and it erodes the surface and these objects appear. And then you can go down and have a look. And if you're a mudlark, you rely on the tide tables. I get the tide table at the beginning of the year and go through and carefully mark everywhere. Oh, I forgot to see how much time I've got here. I carefully mark when there's a particularly low tide. So, for example, the last 3 days have been really, really low, and I've been out every morning. And you want that to be very low because you want to be able to go down there and see areas which are like virgin territory where no one's been for a long time, and you might have wonderful artifacts exposed. So I thought I'd tell you about this one particular day. These are some of my artifacts behind me, by the way. I built those shelves specially when I redid my house so I could display them. So on this particular day, it was February the 9th, and it was Storm Ciara, or Kira, depending on how you say it, which had hit England on that particular day. There were gusts of winds, I think up to 95 miles an hour. Unfortunately, 13 people died across Europe. It was a really big storm, and it wasn't a particularly low tide, and the weather wasn't great, as I've just described, but I thought I'll go down to the river anyway. It was quite early in the morning. And the tide went out to the point that it was meant to go, and then it kept on going. It didn't stop. It went out further and further and further and further. And there's these wooden marks in the water that I always think of as the point beyond which the tide never goes. And actually, it went beyond that. It went 2 meters beyond that, and then you could wade out even further. So there was this huge area of foreshore suddenly exposed with all these treasures it was giving up. So the first thing that was really obvious for all the clay pipes. So I'm sure you know what clay pipes look like. They're here. I have about 500 of them actually that I've collected over time. That's some of them in this jar. And there's so many of them because everybody smoked from about the early 1600s right till the First World War. Tobacco came in to England in about 1580. You can date the pipes by the size of the clay pipe bowl. So that's a little tiny one, probably early 1600s. And they get, you know, as tobacco becomes cheaper and clay pipes more readily accessible like that, they become bigger. Anyway, I found 170 clay pipes on the foreshore that morning in 1 hour. I packed up half a plastic bag. I was beside myself with excitement. They were sort of bog standard, mainly Georgian, because this was an area with Georgian artefacts. Some of them have maker's marks. I really loved them. One had SV on it, which I liked. I researched it, and it turned out to be for Smoke, Virginia. So it was basically an early 17th century advert saying, take my clay pipe. We have the delicious Virginian tobacco that was imported from the Caribbean and not that rubbish that you get native to America that's apparently very bitter. There we go. I found that really interesting. The best pipe I found was this one. I'm going to show you. I pulled it out from between a couple of rocks like this. Look, it's so long. It's like crazy long. And it's amazing. It's such a rocky spot I found it in, and yet it had survived intact. So that was just marvelous. And it would have been longer. And of course, they were disposable. That's why you find them everywhere. You know, people smoke them, pass them around, broke off the end. They got a bit blocked. They chuck them away. And you always find them where people congregate, a bit like cigarette butts at bus stops. So basically, the fag ends of yesteryear. That's how you think of them. That's how I think of them anyway. So the next thing is this. Well, it doesn't look like much, actually, but I was thrilled by this bit of pottery. So it says here, oh, the gout, as in the horrible arthritic complaint in your foot. And here, drink and be well. And it turned out to be a 1750s bottle with a cure for gout made from water gathered from beneath a pear tree with withered fruit. I know this because I researched it. And apparently there was this pub landlord who decided to dig this well, drank the water, proclaimed it had cured his gout and then marketed it to Londoners with this wonderful, with these two medallions on it. What I love, and you can't see it, was in the whole one that I saw online, is in this one it's got crutches, and in that one it's thrown the crutches away. So it's like a proper miracle cure. And I love that. It really connects you to people in the past when you realise, you know, they can be so they can be so quack cures just as easily as we still can. And here's another one. It doesn't look that exciting, but it is. It's a little tiny perfect late 1600s, early 1700s apothecary pot. So if you were of the middling class, because if you were poor, you couldn't have afforded this, you'd basically have to go to someone called a cunning man or woman who's like a witch doctor and have a spell. If you were a middling class person, you'd go to the apothecary and get a potion, and it would be put in a little tin glaze Delftware pot like this, bit of material put over the top and tied with string. I researched some of the stuff that goes in these pots. It's great. So, for example, if you had a bruise, you might get some lion fat, some sparrow brain, and a bit of dried up mummy from Egypt, which I find brilliant. It's called mamia. Apparently, everybody wanted mamia in their potions, and I think that's really interesting because it really connects you to the mindset of people 350 years ago. You know, if you're a middle class person, you knew Egypt existed. You knew they had tombs. You knew there were dead bodies there. I mean, I find that really interesting. And it makes me realize that they were much more cosmopolitan than they imagined. Basically, mudlarking is a way for me to try and connect with people in the past. Otherwise, I think of them as shadows on the wall rather than real people. And I connect with people through their idiosyncrasies, as one does in life anyway. And so I love this. And I think that's rather brilliant. But by the way, this pot is called tin glaze. And I've recently discovered that it was the first white glaze to come to England, and everyone was thrilled because before that, the only way to get white was to buy really, really expensive Chinese import, and only the really aristocratic could afford that. So that was like a poor man's version of the Chinese pottery. I think I've got time. I'm not sure what's going on here. I love this. It looks like a mini dog bone. These are quite hard to come by. I've got two. Been mudlarking for 6 years. Only found two. Found lots of halves. And it is, as I'm sure you all know, a wig curler. So this could be any time from 1650 to the end of the 18th century. So basically what happened was Charles II went to exile in France, and everyone was wearing great wigs there, and he came back with wigs. And of course, all the aristocracy copied him. And they all had these magnificent curling wigs, which they had to look after. And the way you looked after it was you would wind the hair around a heated roller like this, and then you would set the curls. You could even actually wind it when it was cold and then put the whole wig into a cake, like a baking pot, and cover it with pastry and put it in the oven, take it to the baker's, and then set the curls that way. And then once you'd actually got the wig back on your head, if you were wealthy and you had a valet, you could get your valet to spurt with a like a, I forgot what they're called. It puffs air, a pumping thing to puff air. My words have escaped me. Anyway, it puffed white powder over your hair, and then he'd also put in a load of pomade and perfumes. So you'd be quite stinky and quite sticky, and actually added about a pound of weight to their head. And these wigs were going on for about 150 years. Which is extraordinary, really. And by the time we got to the end of the 18th century, they were sort of pathetic little barrister-like things, and they were only the oldest fuddy-duddy would wear them. But I'm fascinated by them. Also, Samuel Pepys was really worried that his wig might be sourced from a plague victim. I'm not sure it's because he didn't want dead people's hair, or he was worried it'd be infectious. And also, he had to take it to his wig maker to get the lice removed at one point. That was apparently a problem. Although a lot of men would shave their hair and then put the wig on top, and that would stop them getting lice. And also it'd cover up their syphilitic sores on their head. And I always imagine a young bride going to on her honeymoon, and the man removing his wig for the first time and revealing this sort of horrible, it's a completely bald head covered in syphilitic scars. Anyway, that's a jolly little thought. So those are my finds. I'm not sure how much time I've got left.
You can have a minute. How's a minute?
Oh, a minute. Well, I'll just show you these. Obsession. I'm getting overexcited here. So this is my obsession. You can't really see what it is. They're pins. Now, each one of these has been handmade. I've got 15,000 of them picked up over 6 years, which I'd say is like a reasonable obsession. slightly nutty. I love them because, like so many of these objects, they tell you everything about life. You could tell the history of England through pins, really, or at least from 1400 when they started being manufactured. They were made by people in their houses, you know, the poor little kids with their eyes being strained. But, you know, there were trade wars over these pins, and Adam Smith used them to teach about the division of labour, and Queen Elizabeth had a royal pinner and 40,000 pins delivered every 6 months, and farthingales were kept together with them, and sleeves were held together, and papers were pinned together, and Elizabethan ruffs had hundreds of them in them. And I just find it completely fascinating that these pins that were even bequeathed in wills, they were that important, are now like literally nothing. You know, you can survive without a pin. I think the only thing I use a pin for is to heat the end and try and gouge out the odd splinter, and that is it. And these are all over my house. We tread on them all the time. My children say, "Mummy, I've trod on a Tudor pin," which is like, I think many houses say that. Anyway, that's what I found on this particular low tide. And I've become really attuned to the tides. I love the tides. I check the tide table every day. And personally, I just find the whole thing miraculous. And just to say, you can, I do keep my finds. I photograph my finds and I put them on Instagram and I write about them as well. So if you want to see more of them, it's foreshore seashore on Instagram.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. That was wonderful.